The Grey Rooms is proud to be supported by Sonnet. Sonnet is a modern, easy-to-use podcasting app for listeners with Android phones. Escaping from an extra-dimensional prison? Well, that's hard. Listening to podcasts should be easy. But many podcast apps send you down an endless set of corridors, each more twisty than the last. Sonnet's clean design and user-friendly interface makes it incredibly easy to discover new shows, listen to your favorites, and keep up to date with all of the latest episodes. And best of all, Sonnet is free. So click on the link in the description to return to the Grey Rooms through Sonnet, and hope, against hope, you do not end up in the Grey Rooms. This episode contains mature language and situations. Listener discretion is advised. You wake, standing on the doorstep of a beautiful mansion. The front door stands open. You can hear voices, music, so many, many people. You step towards the door. You have to know what's inside. You're lost. You have no memory of how you got here. It doesn't matter. Because now, you belong to the Grey Rooms. Hi, I'm Jason, the creator of The Grey Rooms. Merry Christmas, listeners, and happy holidays to all. Welcome to Season 3, Episode 5. All of us here at The Grey Rooms are happy we can share this gift of horror with you. We are close to the year's end, and it's been a joy to bring all of these stories to life. We, of course, could not create this show without all of you and your support. If you are interested in supporting the show in this season of giving, jump on over to patreon.com/The Grey Rooms today and find the tier that's right for you. You'll find many wonderful surprises over there, including bonus episodes, videos, art, and music from J.M. Sheriff. Dun dun dun. And if you're looking for other ways to dip your toes in and learn more about our wonderful authors and actors this season, you could always head on over to our website and check out our extended behind-the-door interviews, or check our social media for other fun content. But as for now, happy holidays, listeners. Bundle up, settle in, and enjoy the show.
In spite of the warmth from the fire and the daylight streaming through the hearth porch window, I felt chilled to the bone. My hand shook and my teacup clattered against its saucer. I quickly set it down, hoping they hadn't noticed. They had, of course. Alma and Bob sat on either side of me, teacups in hand, both calm, both poised. I was still shaking. Still recovering from my time in that city by the water. Still blinking the rising sun from my weary eyes. What's the dog's name?
His name is Oz.
A curious affectation.
I don't know what he's talking about. You're adorable.
Todd told me it gets easier on my first day. He said it would get easier as I went. Is there any truth to that? They exchanged a glance.
It can, yes.
But it depends on you, Mr. Beckett. On your attitude.
My attitude, to be frank, is pretty lousy. But then, can you blame me?
A little.
Not at all.
The attendants stared at each other for a moment. Interesting. My ignorance is the source of my frustration. Separately, you've both proven to be most unhelpful. Perhaps together, you could help me to better understand my situation.
Just keep in mind what we've already said, Mr. Beckett. There's some things we can't tell you no matter how many times you ask.
Fair enough. What if we don't talk about my situation then?
I'm sorry.
Alma mentioned others had come before me. That I'm not the first person to be a guest in the rooms.
Yes, that's right.
Can we talk about them then? It would be helpful to know what the other people who have been in my shoes were like.
Why would knowing about other guests be helpful? Here is their story. They arrived, chose their rooms, and died again and again and again. Eventually, they left the project. The end.
You said you aren't mortal. It's things like this that make it easy to believe that's true.
I believe I understand, Mr. Beckett. You're thinking perhaps you'll spot some kind of similarity between yourself and the other guests, correct? Something that might tell you more about why you're here?
I can't fool you, Miss Alma. And I know you can't tell me everything, but yes, even some notion of what I have in common with these other mortals might help. Might make this easier.
He has been fairly reasonable so far.
I suppose there's no harm in it. What would you like to know, sir?
All right. Who was the first guest?
Well before my time.
Well, technically there were others before him. I suppose the first real guest in the rooms was a man named Raymond.
Now why do you say that?
His time in the rooms was the first productive venture here.
What made Raymond so special?
To be blunt, nothing. He just happened to be up next. His time in the rooms was our first attempt at having a guest. It was successful, though that success was short-lived.
Bob looked at me implacably with those stormy blue eyes. His face could have been carved of marble for all the warmth I saw there.
You have a much easier time of it here at the manor than poor Raymond did.
Good to know. Was Todd a guest in the rooms? He's the only other mortal I've met here, I believe.
He was, yes.
Is that why he's so odd?
May I?
She looked expectantly at Bob, who settled back into his chair and reached for his teacup.
Please.
The short answer to that question is that Todd was always a strange one, even before he entered the rooms. His eccentric nature was exacerbated by his experience.
You can't tell me why either Raymond or Todd were chosen to be guests, can you?
I'm afraid not.
All right. Did Todd lose his hand in the rooms? Now that was a question worth asking. Alma and Bob exchanged a series of glances. I considered for the first time that they might have some method of communicating with each other I was not privy to.
No, as you've seen yourself, the rooms don't leave any permanent scars on guests. He lost his hand somewhat recently. And no, I can't tell you why.
I see. Mentally, I swore to find and speak with Todd the first chance I could. It would just be a matter of getting him alone, without any listening ears.
Last question, Mr. Beckett. We'll need you to be making your selection soon.
All right. Who was the guest in the room immediately before me? Bob's head dipped towards the floor. His implacable facade shifted ever so slightly.
A woman named Samantha.
Alma, you're new to the project, right?
Yes, I told you as much.
So, Bob here would have been Samantha's attendant. Is that right, Bob?
Yes.
Why did Samantha leave the project?
This isn't something we can discuss with you, Mr. Beckett.
Well, it's interesting, Alma. You see, when Bob and I met, he mentioned there'd been an incident not that long ago. He said the repercussions were unpleasant. Now, if Samantha was the guest just before me, that would mean the incident was during her time on the project. Wouldn't it? I looked from one face to the other. Bob was a statue, again. Except around the eyes. Those expressive, haunted eyes. Alma glowered at me, and I could see her fingers twitching. I considered that perhaps I had overplayed my hand. I had no interest in discovering more of Alma's sorcery. You know what? I'm sorry. I've clearly touched on a sore subject here. I hope you understand where I'm coming from. There's just so much I don't know. Bob raised his head to regard me. Something had changed, something deep down. But his mask was back on. Pleasant. Calm.
Apology accepted, Mr. Beckett. These are still early days for you.
He leaned forward, and for the first time since meeting him, I felt a sense of menace in his gaze. Something about the way he moved reminded me of a predator.
And we have many, many tomorrows ahead of us.
Bob, do you have the rooms?
Yes. Here we go. Here are your choices for this particular outing into Ash Manor.
For the second time, I found myself walking down a hallway in the gray rooms with a smile on my face. A smile I did my best to hide.
It will be a left, just there.
I know, sir. You taught me well. I gestured at my head with a wave and a glance over my shoulder. The dour attendant was trailing along behind me like a wraith. I wasn't quite sure why, though I could guess.
Yes, well, it's my job to ensure you make it to your door.
We took the left and ascended the stairs that loomed suddenly before us. The door stood alone at the top of a small landing. There was barely enough room for the two of us to stand side by side. Off to the side, the plaque read simply, "Strings." The door itself was a work of art. It was painted a weathered blue with an ornate pull handle and knocker. A cheerful red candle burned in a Victorian holder affixed to the door frame. I could see little wisps of snow blowing from under the doorway. Well, thank you for walking me all this way. You must have other things to do.
I do.
He stared at me with those burning eyes for a long moment.
Remember the jewel, Mr. Beckett? The many facets of Ash Manor. Management and I are hopeful that by giving you some autonomy, some leash, that you will settle in more comfortably.
He leaned in, close. If he had been mortal, I would have smelled his breath.
Do not make me yank that leash, sir. You will not enjoy the experience.
In spite of myself, I took a step back.
Do I make myself clear?
I didn't trust my voice, so I simply nodded.
Enjoy your room, then, if you can.
He began to descend the stairs, shadows rising at the bottom to envelop him.
We should talk more when you get back.
I watched him until he was gone, out of sight. Gave it a 10 count beyond that, and another 10 count beyond that. I could remember now that in my younger days I'd had a problem with impatience. This counting game was a simple way for me to stay calm, to help me choose my moment. I glanced at the door, and slipped quietly down the stairs in the attendant's wake. I'd be back. I'd walk through the door and into whatever snowy nightmare awaited beyond. But first, and finally, I had something to follow up on. Something to search for. A name. Samantha. If I could discover what had happened to Samantha, perhaps my time in the rooms would be just as much as an incident as hers.
Rietta pushed ahead of me as we shuffled through the crowded Boston street. With Christmas looming, adults rushed from stall to shop looking for last-minute gifts. Kids ogled steamed-over windows displaying model trains, dolls with rosy cheeks, and other toys I'd never be able to afford.
Wait for it.
A biting wind stole puffs of air from my mouth. With each step, breaths came faster, and my feet felt heavier. Heart racing, I snatched at the steaming sausage roll as we passed the pastry vendor. Flakes of golden crust scattered into the wind as I rammed my hand into my pocket. We made it to the end of the block and turned toward home.
Nicely done. We'll make a fine pickpocket of you yet. Same time tomorrow?
Unable to speak with my heart in my throat, I nodded.
You need to learn to relax. You look guilty as hell.
Rietta lifted her stained hat, scratched at close-cropped hair dark with grease, and dropped the hat back on her head. I nodded again. At the next intersection, Rietta and I parted ways. After 6 blocks and 2 right turns, I reached the snow-dusted fire escape ladder hanging 9 feet in the air. I crouched down on the lid of an ice-covered trash can and leapt. My left hand missed, but my right hand caught at the last moment. I swung in the bitter air for several seconds, catching my breath. Then I grabbed hold with my other hand and hauled myself up the ladder. Up 3 flights of metal stairs and put all my weight into opening the frozen shut window. Snowflakes swirled in before I could get the window shut. Mother groaned, and I turned to face the gloomy one-room apartment. She lay on a thin bed of mite-infested straw, her body covered in 2 moth-eaten blankets. Her face poked out from the blanket, nose red and lips blue from the cold. "I brought you something to eat." Flaky crust fell from my pocket as I removed the fat roll. I broke off a chunk and pressed it against Mother's mouth. Scabbed lips parted. I pushed in the food, and Mother ate a few bites. Before the roll was halfway gone, she pulled away and lowered her head to the straw. Her eyes fluttered closed and soft snores clawed from her throat. I picked at the remainder of the roll and licked congealed grease from my fingers as I waited at the window for the sun to set. Lights appeared in the rooms as families returned home. Fathers played with toddlers while mothers ran to the stove and oven at the same time. Then the families sat down to eat together. After, they snuffed out the lamps and crawled into bed. I continued to watch the dark windows, imagining myself as a toddler playing with his father. Sometime after the moon had traveled across the sky and fat white flakes blotted out the stars, I crept into bed beside Mother after tucking in loose ends of the blankets around her too thin body. I lay on my stomach with my hands shoved under my torso and watched Mother's face contort from the dreams of her fractured mind until I drifted off. The next morning, we pushed past a group of kids jostling each other at a stand selling candies.
You see the mob with the top hat and the fur-lined coat?
Yeah, I see him. I glanced at the man 20 feet away, then slid my eyes to the stall selling rugs on the right.
Him. You see him? You gotta learn to talk like us if you want to be a part of us. You may look like us with your soot covering your clothes, but you still talk like them. Your eyes ain't haunted enough yet. Something really bad has gotta happen before you get a look of a thief in your eye.
Rietta slapped me on the back. Her eyes flashed to the fancy man before flicking away. He's by himself. Won't he notice?
He's too busy making sure his coat don't touch no riffraff. I'll run into his left side while you steal from his right pocket.
I nodded, and we switched sides. As Rietta said would happen, she ran into the man. My hand snaked into his pocket. Just as I was pulling away with a fat purse, he snatched my wrist.
What do we have here?
His face drew so close to mine I could smell mint and tobacco on his breath.
Not a very good pickpocket, are you, son?
I tried to pull away, but his grip held firm. Rietta flashed an apologetic look, then ran off, narrowly missing a police officer heading toward us.
Everything all right?
Fancy man eyed me a while longer, gaze traveling from my face down to my scuffed boots and back up. Then he turned to the officer with a grin.
Everything is fine. Just showing my nephew around town. He is new here.
Your nephew, eh?
Yes, sir. Just showing him how things work in this city.
You sure?
The officer eyed me, gloved hand tightening on his truncheon. Just then, a shout rose down the street. We turned in time to see Rietta dash away from a vendor, shaking a ladle in her direction.
Looks like you have a thief to catch.
With a last glance at me, the officer hustled after Rietta's retreating form. What are you going to do with me? The man held my hand in a grip so tight it turned my fingers pale. His lips parted in a toothy grin.
Today is your lucky day, son. Come with me.
He dropped my wrist and turned away. You're not gonna have me arrested? The man stopped and turned back.
You hungry?
What?
Are you hungry? I know a good place just up the street.
I followed the man to a tall shop at the end of the block. A large square opened on the other side. Marionettes wearing bright costumes lined the 2 large windows facing the street. Some sat on crates, while others stood with their strings tied above, holding them in different poses. Children laughed and pointed at the windows, and adults in lavish attire streamed in and out the double doors. I craned my neck to look up at the colorful sign that read, Geppetto's Marionettes.
My inspiration comes from watching them.
I followed the man's gaze to the children, then glanced back at him. His eyes gleamed and his lips parted. One hand reached out and made odd movements in the air before it dropped to his side, and he turned to me.
Please, come inside.
Inside the shop, he steered me through meandering aisles of marionettes with different shades of wood bodies. Some were white as snow, others red as a fox, still others dark as soot. Life-sized marionettes lined some shelves. Marionettes small as toddlers lined others. Clothing in bright reds, blues, and purples covered their bodies. Brown, white, and black suits with matching capes thrown over one shoulder covered others. Glassy eyes in varying shades of blue, brown, and green watched me as I passed. I followed the man through a pair of swinging doors, past a padlocked door underneath a gleaming staircase and up the stairs. On the second floor, the man showed me to a table near a window, then disappeared out the room. Several minutes later, he came back carrying a platter of steaming food and a pot of tea. We sat at the table under the window and ate a lunch of noodle soup, fried wontons, steamed dumplings, and oolong tea. After the man had his fill, he sipped his tea and watched me fill my plate for the third time.
I have a proposition for you. I am in need of a shop assistant. The last one just up and quit. No notice, no goodbye.
He sipped at his tea.
You would package the marionettes for buyers, carry their purchases home if need be, keep grubby children's hands from the merchandise, and dust the shelves. Pay is $0.01 a day. Would you be interested?
I thought back to the dolls lining the shelves in the shop, how their eyes had followed me, how their painted mouths leered from elevated perches. That's it? That's all I'd have to do?
That is it. And we will not have to tell the police what happened today.
My stomach twisted. If I didn't work for this man, he would have me arrested. Would it be so bad? I'd have a roof over my head and wouldn't have to steal to scrape by. I stared down at my plate.
I would feed you breakfast and dinner every day. I cannot have a half-starved shop boy faint while carrying client purchases home.
All right, I'll do it. The man nodded once and stood. He smoothed his starched white shirt and motioned me to follow. He led me to an attached bathing room with a sink and toilet and told me to wash up. While I was scrubbing my face with a cloth, he deposited a fresh set of clothing on the toilet and told me to come downstairs when I was presentable. A few minutes later, I stepped back into the shop through the rear swinging doors, much cleaner. Near the front counter was a girl not much older than I was, hard at work.
Boy, packages purchased. Hurry now!
I pushed through the throng of adults walking the shop and headed toward the counter on the right side of the door. The girl who had shouted pointed to a marionette lying on the counter behind her, and then to the crates lining the shelves beneath. Choosing a crate of the correct size, I opened it and placed the doll inside. Blue wooden eyes glared as I closed the lid. I handed the crate to the customer, then accepted the next purchase. And for the rest of the day, I laid marionettes to rest in crates that would carry them to their new homes. That evening, after closing, the shop girl showed me how to dust the shelves between the dolls, being careful not to touch their bodies or clothes. As I worked, I realized there was a small marionette tucked behind two toddler-sized puppets with matching flowing dresses. As I worked the shelf with my cloth, clearing it of dust, a stubby leg poked out from under one of the dresses. I glanced around to make sure I was alone before grabbing hold of a naked foot with the cloth and pulling the thing out. A fat baby with pale skin grinned up at me, a single tooth poking through its lower gums. The hands were raised as if the baby wanted me to pick it up.
I have had that one for years.
I jumped at the sound of Geppetto's voice and tried not to look guilty as I turned to face him.
Oh, it is quite all right. I had actually forgot about her. Carlotta, my first marionette, modeled after my own child who died exactly 4 months after she was born.
He stepped forward and drew a hand down the baby's chubby cheek.
Would you like her? She could keep your mother company while you were here working all day. She would like that, would she not? Your mother?
Mother had lamented all my life that I had been her only child. Geppetto reached out for the marionette. He held it for several long moments, fussing over its clothes before handing it to me. I didn't know what else to do besides take it.
Carlotta will have a good home now.
Thank you. He nodded and turned away, dabbing at his eyes with a white cloth. I put away my cleaning supplies and hurried to leave the shop.
What happened to you?
I looked over to see Rietta slip from the shadow of a building and saunter over.
Why are you so clean? You have a bath?
I was given a job.
From the fancy man? That's some kind of joke?
He needs a shop boy to help with his marionettes.
Marionettes? You mean you're working for Geppetto, the puppet maker? Them dolls as disturbing as they look from the windows?
Worse, their eyes follow me around the shop.
How's it getting so lifelike? I heard they look just like children.
My head cocked as I glanced at Carlotta sitting on my hip. Rietta was right. Even though her skin was made of wood, she looked real enough. In the moonlight, I could almost mistake her for a real baby. Dunno. I didn't see him making them. I just packaged the marionettes and cleaned the shelves.
That one of them?
Yeah?
Horrifying.
I nodded, unable to tear my eyes from the baby's face. Even the grooves along the mouth and under the eyes looked real.
How much he paying you?
$1 a day.
Not bad for a working man. Could have made more with the ruffians, though.
I have to work for Geppetto, or he'll turn me over to the police. Tired. It's been a long day. See you in the morning?
Yeah, sure.
I bid Rietta good night and turned to head down the alley to the fire escape. Mother, you'll never guess what happened today. I got a job. Geppetto, the puppet maker, asked me to be his shop boy. He's going to pay me $1 a day. I know it isn't much, but the lump on the floor hadn't moved since I entered the room. Mama? I dropped the marionette at the foot of the bed. Crouching down in front of Mother, I pulled the covers from her face. The blue of her lips had spread to her cheeks and closed eyelids. I shook her shoulder and called her name a few times. When she still didn't open her eyes or say anything, my fingers found her ice-drenched neck. There was no pulse. Mother? I fell on my butt and stared at the unmoving lump. She had been breathing this morning when I left. Hadn't she? Cold that had nothing to do with the temperature gripped my heart. A low buzzing noise filled my ears and breath deserted my lungs. My frozen limbs jumped into action when something hit the wall next door. I scrambled for the window, fell onto the fire escape and slipped and slid to the ground. Heavy feet carried me through quiet streets. My mind remained in the apartment, eyes refusing to see anything but the unmoving lump of blankets with the blue face peeking out. A high-pitched sound caught on the wind. My head shot up, and I blinked at the deserted square. I wiped away snowflakes hardening on wet eyelashes, listening hard. Whatever it was, I didn't hear it again. Without my mind focused on Mother, biting cold seeped into my bones. I needed a place to stay for the night. My eyes found the marionette shop, and I crept toward the dark doors. Perhaps Geppetto wouldn't notice if I slept in the upstairs room. A flickering light caught my eye and I leaned over the stoop. A small window sat at street level. Snow had accumulated to nearly the top. Yellow light glowed beneath the snow. That must have been where the padlocked door led. The sound came again. A scream. Leaping down the stairs, I ran to the window and crouched before it. I had to clear a few inches of snow before I could properly see inside. A girl with long, curly blonde hair sat with her back to the window. Geppetto prowled before her. First, he pushed the hair from her shoulders, then pulled chunks back in place. He bent over with a paintbrush in hand and did something to her face, then leaned back to admire his work. He turned to a long wardrobe and removed a pink dress with big bows and lots of lace, then a matching light blue dress. She shivered, but didn't make a move to get away. Geppetto spoke as he worked. Even though I couldn't hear the words through the glass, it looked like he spoke in a gentle manner. Every few words, he would pat the girl on the shoulder. My gaze followed Geppetto to a counter across from the wardrobe. Lining the counter and wall behind it were dozens of knives and other sharp instruments. Candlelight glinted off the metal as he picked up each piece, examined it, and set it back down. Settling on a long, slender instrument with a hook on the end, he returned to the girl. He reached out with the hooked end and inserted it into her ear. I expected the instrument to stop once it reached a certain depth, but it kept moving until half the length stuck out. Falling back from the window, I raced up the stairs to the front door. I banged on the glass, watching for a light inside. When I saw it come on behind the swinging doors, I knew I had the man's attention. I leapt over the concrete wall and headed back to the window. I pushed it open and slid inside the basement just as the front door opened. I raced to the girl and examined the instrument sticking out of her ear. She stared straight ahead, not blinking, chest barely rising under the dozens of ribbons. My hand froze halfway to the instrument. "Henrietta?" She didn't respond. The last time I called Rietta by her full name, she boxed my ears so hard I couldn't hear right for a week.
"What are you doing here?"
I spun to find him standing in the doorway at the bottom of the stairs. When he saw me, a slow smile crept onto his face.
"Ah, my new shop boy."
He stared at me for a long moment before his expression soured.
The same thing happened to my last shop boy. He also got curious. Remember the marionette in the front window? The one dressed as an Indian chief with the headdress? That was your predecessor.
His head tilted to the side, and the smile returned.
Perhaps I will make you his victim.
The victim?
Every savage needs a white man to scalp. It's not funny.
I couldn't understand his words over the pounding in my ears. I leapt for the window, tugging so hard that I flew backward when it refused to open. He stood over me, blotting out the light from the many candles. Geppetto's skin was pinched tight, like a grinning skull. My body rose, against my will. I tried to jerk away, but my legs moved without my mind telling them to. They carried me to the table and sat me next to Rietta. I could only watch as the man undressed me, cleaned my skin with a pungent soap and cloth, and began to paint my face. Then he fitted me for a fancy suit and shoved white gloves on my stiff hands. Geppetto grabbed a sharp, glistening blade as long as his forearm from the counter.
Have to make it look authentic, do we not? I know a man in Germany who will pay good money for the pair of you. He has an odd fascination of anything American Indian. The more macabre, the better.
With a chuckle, he yanked on my hair and raised the blade. Warm blood oozed down my face and clouded my vision as he sliced. There was no pain, but far away I heard myself scream.
Now, for the final touch.
Geppetto retrieved a second hook, which he proceeded to insert into my ear. I felt every centimeter of cold metal push through my brain. It met no resistance as it continued to the center. Something gave way with an audible crunch. The man's lips moved as he began to ease out the hook. Out of the corner of my eye, I could see white pieces of string twined around the instrument. Starting with my fingers and toes, my body began to stiffen. It felt like my skin was turning into something else, something hard and unyielding. Joints locked into place and blood ceased to move. The sensation continued to crawl up my body and into my neck. Thoughts began to slow by the time the hook was a foot away. The white strings grew thicker, stronger. The hook moved another few inches and my heart stopped beating. Another inch, and my blood ceased to move. Thoughts flew from my mind and my vision grew blurry. My head became heavy, but I couldn't lower it. Fancy Man snapped the strings taut with the hook and tied them together over my head. Then he stood back and watched as my brain stiffened in my skull and my eyes turned to wood. My last conscious thought was of Mother, and her cold body waiting at home for me to say goodbye.
Strings, written by C.A. Greene. With performances by David Cummings as Geppetto, Dan Rosales as Rafe, Kelly Nienaltowski as Rietta, Graham Rowat as the police officer, and Emily Shaver as the shopgirl. Past is Prologue, written by Michael Zenke, featuring performances by Graham Rowat as Bob, Eddie Cooper as Beckett, and Chantal Jean-Pierre as Alma. Musical compositions by J.M. Scherf. Episode artwork, web development, and creative direction is by Cassie Pertite. Social media and Patreon management by Brooks Bigley. Videography by Hale Scherf. Audio engineering and sound design was by me, Jason Wilson. Happy holidays, listeners. We hope you've enjoyed this gift of horror that slid down your chimneys and into your feeds. see what we did there? Yeah. We really could not do this without all of you. We would like to take the time to thank our patrons once again, and to any of those who have taken the time to leave us a 5-star rating and a review. You know, those reviews are what keep us at the top of the charts and makes it easier for more tortured souls to find this show. Patrons like Amy Nikolai, Arthur Unk, Diver Ellie, Ellie Dowell, Emily Cullen, Haley's Vomit, Jackalbot Snows, Jason Porras, Jessica Finch, Kelly Bear, Laura Lupinetti, Lynn Browning, Lizzie B, Megan Pruitt, Pop Squad, Michael Velez, Mike Devine, Michael Philic BG, Paige 314, Patrick Stewart, Sean Geary, Sean, I apologize ahead of time. I'm gonna probably torture your name. McCorkordale. McCorkordale? Yep, send me a message. I want to say that right. Man, oh man. Thanks for your support regardless. Spirit Live. Stacy Thuas. Talicia Gullman. The Original Nick Show. Teresa Tabor. Jose Torres, and Joshua Carlino. The Grey Rooms is also streaming for free on Spotify, so just get the Spotify app and or open the browser and just search for The Grey Rooms. And you can find out more by joining us on social media. You can find us on Instagram, Twitter, Facebook, Reddit, and YouTube. And we took your advice and extended an olive branch to all of the tortured souls who have passed through the rooms. Our emotional support group is always looking to help you with all of your needs. And don't forget to pop on into our ever-busy, ever-growing, and ever-fun and engaging Discord channel. So again, thank you ever so much for giving us your time and your ears. We really do hope that you have enjoyed the conclusion of 2020, because boy, oh boy, we have and are ready to move on. But anyway, we're going to get back to producing more for you to enjoy. So with that being said, we'll see you next week. Oh, and happy holidays.